Hi everyone, this is Amir, Parsa from MoMA, and I'm here with Laurel Humble of the Alzheimer's Project. And I know that some of you have participated in the past in one of our programs or one of the webinars around art looking. I just wanted to say that today's webinar is going to focus on art making. We'll have a 40-minute presentation, and then after that, questions. I am going to turn it over now to Laurel, my colleague, who is going to get into some of our programs in detail, and I'm going to pass it over to her now.
And I am going to take us off speakerphone only so that I can be as easy to hear as possible. And I think a lot of you were on the call a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to echo what Amir said then, that it's very strange to talk to nobody, to feel like you're having a conversation, but not to be able to see how you all are kind of responding and the like. So I will try to talk slowly and we'll get right into it. So as Amir said, let me pull this up. So as Amir said, today we'll focus more on the art making side of programming, and he mentioned in the last webinar, but I'll say it again here, that we offer a number of different types of programs for individuals with Alzheimer's disease here at MoMA, and they kind of have all sorts of different structures and focuses. So some of the programs take place on-site, some of them are off-site at care organizations. In some programs, we're working with organizations, while in others, we're working with individual families or individuals with dementia who are coming with a member of their family or with a paid professional caregiver, or a combination of, both. In some programs, we do only art looking, and then some programs we do only art making, and then some programs we combine those two. And then also, we might have a one-time program or multiple visits. And so these are the sort of possible parameters that you can work with and it's something certainly that you can look at if you're thinking about art making programs, whether or not this is going to be taking place kind of on your home turf, so to speak, or if you'll be going off-site. I know we're not all museum people here, and so off-site means something different for us as opposed to you perhaps. And then for the art making program, you could be working with a group of people who are already kind of affiliated or coming together through an organization, or you can bring individual families together and do art making in that manner. And then it can be a one-time thing, or it can be a series of projects or experiences wherein you connect the different weeks or months, each session through some larger curriculum. To give you a bit of background on the programs that we do here at the museum, I just want to say that we were working with senior centers and other kinds of senior-focused organizations for a number of years, for probably decades, through our community outreach and just general programs here through the education department at the museum. And then in 2003-ish, we began to really look at the Alzheimer's disease audience, so to speak, and think about developing a program that is specifically for that population or that audience. And then in 2006, we launched Meet Me at MoMA, which is one iteration of all these programs. It's a family program for individuals who are in the early to mid stages of Alzheimer's disease, and it happens once a month, and it's in the galleries exclusively. That is, there's no kind of art making or studio experience with that program. And then in 2008, we began to pilot an art making only program for that Meet Me at MoMA audience. So again, individuals in the early middle stages and their family or professional caregiver. And for the most part, these are individuals who are still living at home. And so that program, for the Meet Me at MoMA program, it was one that requires still, because it happens today, pre-registration, and it's something that we kind of track and run through the education department as opposed to a group coming in from an organization. and this pilot art making program was very similar logistically. So we were calling on the same kind of audience, but instead of them coming in for a once a month session discussion in the galleries, they were coming in for a multi-week program in the studio spaces. So this pilot art making program again happened in 2008. We decided for this program to have 6 consecutive weeks, and then it was theme based. So each week we looked at a different theme. We actually had 3 themes: portraiture, landscape, still life. And then at the separate weeks, we had one time looking at, for instance, portraiture in a representational fashion, and then the next week looking at it in a more abstract way, or thinking about a more abstract interpretation of this idea of a portrait. And this was the plan. We had worked with one of our community and access educators who have taught MoMA at MoMA and other programs for individuals with a range of abilities and disabilities to design this curriculum, the 6-week curriculum. And then after the first week, we actually abandoned the entire thing, which is why why we call it a pilot program, I guess you could say. And so I just wanted to emphasize that because, we were thinking through themes because that was the structure of the Meet Me at MoMA program. And then as we were presenting this the first project, which was actually landscape, and it was representational landscape, and we were working with paint, we found that we were working with gouache and
Connie Jennings.
Oh. Okay. We were working with gouache, and then we found that people just wanted to experiment with the gouache. It wasn't a matter of wanting to paint a representational landscape or, think of a place that was meaningful to them and how they would represent it. It was more people were really just drawn to the materials and wanting to experiment with those. And so after that first week, as I said, we kind of abandoned that original curriculum, trying to get people to really consider this idea of a representational or an abstract landscape, portrait, or still life, and to really think of new mediums that we could introduce at each of the 6 sessions, and then have people just experiment with those. So you can see here from this slide, these are some of the images just from the pilot program that we looked at. We did still life drawing, and I'll just point out the image on the bottom left corner. We had the table set up in this U shape. We had, our little still life presented in the middle, and one of our participants, instead of, drawing the still life that we had set up, kind of turned to the right a bit and just drew everybody else drawing the still life, which is a great kind of interpretation of the idea of still life in the first place. And then we also have wooden blocks. We did these assemblages that were then painted. We did printmaking. And we also worked with masks. And so I also wanted to say that for that group, we worked with 8 couples who were coming. We kind of selected them ourselves because they had been coming to Meet Me at MoMA for a long time. They had expressed interest in doing an art-making program should we ever create one. And so we kind of used them as our initial participants, expecting that they would give very thoughtful feedback and also be able to kind of help us improve the program in the future. And so this is more what the structure looks like now. That was, again, in 2008, so this is going to be our, this will be our third, thank you, third recreation or redoing of this program because it happens only once a year. And now, again, we work with the same audience, so individuals in the early stage and the family or professional caregiver. Instead of being theme-based, we're more material-based. At the beginning of the program, we look at images all together and discuss those images. And because we're looking at mediums in each of the sessions, the images that we're using are images that are, of course, done in that medium. Works that are done in that medium, and then we also provide reproductions for all participants. So we'll do, a slide presentation with these images, but then also have printouts so that they can be referenced again later by each of the individual participants, or they can also take them home and continue to discuss or think about them in a different setting. We try to create projects that can be done independently or collaboratively, and then the sessions are typically 2 hours. It's a 4-week course now instead of a 6-week course. And whenever possible, we finish the programs with a culminating exhibition where we present, all of the work or some of the work that's been created over the course of the program, and then, of course, invite family members and friends to see them on the walls at the Museum of Modern Art. So this is just to give you an example of the latest program that we did. This was the one that we did last year, and you can see that the 4 mediums that we worked with were paint, and this is oil-based and water-based paint that we were trying to give participants an opportunity to really experiment with. We did, we worked with clay, making clay heads or busts. We did printmaking, again, because it was so wildly popular in the years before, and then we did these assemblage boxes that were kind of came out of a conversation about artists like Joseph Cornell and working with found objects to create works of art. And then I'll just show you, kind of go into detail a bit more for the printmaking week. So these are the example images that we use for that particular session. And I just want to kind of differentiate this conversation that we have at the beginning of an art making program, as opposed to what Amir went over in such detail a couple weeks ago, where you would be in the galleries, for an hour and a half looking at 4 or 5 works of art and really going through this deep conversation that builds on observation and description, and then incorporates interpretation and connection, and some evaluation perhaps as well. Whereas with this conversation, it was much shorter. It was probably 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of the 2-hour session, and we tried to include a range of images, so both figurative and abstract, so to speak, or non-representational. So you can see that we have, this kind of geometric Louise Bourgeois print down here, this red swirl in the bottom right corner, or in the middle, on the top, we have this kind of Kirchner woman that's been carved out, this woodblock print. So, and the conversation is less of I would say it's much more descriptive, and it's always kind of touching on the process of how something is made and those kind of formal elements that are, part of its creation and its final product. So, for the image on the upper left-hand corner, for instance, where in the galleries you might talk about archetypal forms and quote-unquote, primitive imagery or something like that, the emphasis here would be much more along the lines of, you could certainly bring that in, but then also along the lines of where on the block something has been carved out, and then what remains, and then the inking, and how that kind of will translate. So connecting the beginning process with the final product. I hope that's clear. And so then just to give you an example of how it went, this is Manny, as you can see from his name tag. I like this image a lot in general because I think it shows some of the initial steps in creating the works, and I also just love the connection between the block print that he made and then his fantastic geometric shirt. You can tell that there's something that attracts him to both. But you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, we gave out paper initially so that all the participants could draw out their design or their image or whatever it is on paper and then transfer it to balsa foam, which is right in front of him. And you can see that he has drawn it on there, and it's even a bit more elaborate than the paper drawing that's in the bottom right-hand corner. You can also see the printout of the slides there in front of him as well, the 2 different Louise Bourgeois images that we showed. And then this is him again working on his balsa foam, and this balsa foam is something that is it's pretty easy to carve into. You can use pencil, which is really helpful. We also provided kind of clay carving tools if you wanted to remove large chunks of the balsa foam. But again, I know some people ask questions in advance about what kind of materials to use and what is kind of the most accessible, but also what's going to give you a nice product in the end. And so this balsa foam was really helpful for for the printmaking, and it was something that everyone was able to work with and also prints up very nicely. So this is Manny again, just working on his image and then inking and rolling it out and pressing it onto the paper. And then this is the kind of grand reveal, which I think is part of why printmaking has always been a real favorite we've experienced. And I think part of it is the kind of the reveal part where you peel back your image from your block and you get to see what it is. You might notice that the image that Meryl is helping Manny peel back, I guess, right here is different than the one I showed before, but it was also interesting to see how people, the images that they came up with, but also if they were abstract or representational. Again, because, in this pilot program that we did, we had specified, or the original plan for the pilot program, we had specified whether or not they would be working abstractly or figuratively. And this is something that we've also asked about in evaluations in the past, whether or not people have a preference as to how they work. And we found both in the pilot program that it wasn't something that really people were thinking about intentionally, I think. And then also through the evaluation, we found that people really had no preference as to how they worked, or that they kind of thought about their practice or their creative process in terms of abstraction or figuration. So again, there's the image, and then here are a few more examples of participant artwork. And you can see, again, that there is kind of a range from representational works and then also abstract works, and some really, really nice images that resulted. And these, of the 4 weeks, we decided for our exhibition to only include their prints, and so this is just a kind of snapshot from the show, but you can tell they also look quite nice when they're on display. So we also have done a bit of evaluation, nothing as extensive as the NYU evaluation that we touched on a couple weeks ago of the Meet Me at MoMA program in the galleries, but we did do focus groups and ask participants to kind of reflect on the experience of participating in a multi-week course, what they liked and disliked, but very informal. And these are some of the responses that we got from that. So, number one, having a course that took place over consecutive weeks, 4, 6, whatever it is, people kind of responded to that, saying that they liked the opportunity to see the same people every single time. Whereas with the Meet Me at MoMA program, it happens once a month, and the groups change from month to month. Here, with the consecutive weeks, you're with the same group the whole time, and I think the relationships and the camaraderie that formed over the course of those weeks is something that you see more here than maybe with the Meet Me at MoMA program. The importance of a small group, again, I think because of the intimacy of a small group and the kind of camaraderie, again, that can build through that. People talked about the quality and the variety of the materials. So again, it was kind of nice to see this validation that it was in fact the materials more than the themes that people were really responding to, but also the quality of the materials, that you're not giving somebody a kind of cookie cutter project, that it's sophisticated materials and people feel like they're participating in a sophisticated art making experience. And I would also say I mentioned before that this program only happens once a year, and because all in all it's a bit more expensive and time consuming staff wise than the Meet Me at MoMA program, because for each of the sessions we have one educator, but there's 2 groups, so then 2 educators, and we actually have 2 sessions, so 4 educators for 4 weeks. And then there is preparation time for the materials. The materials cost money, and then we also have volunteer staff or full-time education staff assisting, so maybe 1 or even 2 people assisting the educator. So that's really quite a lot more than you see with the Meet Me at MoMA program, and we could probably reduce costs if we use less nice materials, so to speak, but and then offer it more perhaps. But this seems to seems to be important to participants, as I said here in the evaluation. And so we do it once a year, and we make sure that we kind of do it the best we can then. People also responded to the initial slide introduction, saying that it was helpful in kind of getting the ball rolling and providing people with inspiration, but without necessarily steering them too much in one direction. So again, having a nice variety of images doesn't essentially encourage people to work in one way. It allows for a variety of interpretations of the medium, and people can go from there. People also commented on the support and the responsiveness of the educator, which is something that Amir touched on a couple weeks ago that we saw with the NYU study of Meet Me at MoMA as well, that the educator and their encouragement and their kind of assistance with materials is sets a tone, an initial tone, and then it's also helpful in encouraging participants as they're working. And then bringing artwork home as a way of extending the program or extending the experience. We had a number of participants comment that, and this is caregivers, I guess, comment that perhaps their loved one, the person they're coming with, might not remember that they made a work, but then if they have this product in their house and then they see it and then they can talk about it later on, that it helps to extend the experience later. And then also sharing work with each other as a group. Often at the end of a program, there's time to walk around and see what other people are creating, and people really like the opportunity to see each other's work, to learn about each other in a new way there, and see how the other participants are kind of interpreting or working with the materials that we're presenting. And then for the participant experience, these were just some of the aspects of the experience that the participants mentioned during these focus groups. An increase in self-worth and mood, and a discovering or awakening of creative potential or a creative part of yourself, really. And then also the absorption in the creative process. And this, I think, is also kind of separate from the gallery program, where you can certainly become absorbed in a conversation. I think there is something slightly different about working hands-on with materials and how exactly, how absorbed you can become in that process. And so it was interesting to see these results because they really reflect a lot of what we had already determined or kind of considered or compiled as benefits of engaging with art. And these are the ones that I have on the screen now are examples that we use when talking about all kinds of artistic engagement, but also particularly with the gallery program or art discussion. But that we're providing a meaningful activity and an opportunity for self-growth. Excuse me. And also a forum for exploration and exchange of ideas and really an exchange of kind of creative potential and exposure of that, and an opportunity to share personal experiences, and that the program can invite or provide new insight into others' ideas and interests, and also their creative potential. One thing that we hear a lot from participants is both with this program and with the gallery program that, for instance, a caregiver would say, well, I never knew that my husband or my father was interested in this, or I never heard that story before, and that's something that can certainly come out of art making as well. That engagement allows for a means to make connections with individual experiences and the world at large, and this is through your own creation. Really, you're connecting with artists past and present, and the ideas that they are putting forth or have put forth. It allows for a social setting that allows connection to one's peers. Again, with this, having a consecutive week course where you might have a number of individuals together week after week perhaps provides a deeper connection. The idea of a respite, a physical and a psychological respite. And we also talk about this idea of an art education program versus an art therapy program, but the therapeutic benefits of engaging in an educational program as well. opportunities for creative expression, and participation in a normalizing experience. So, for this program, and I'll just kind of run through these considerations, and also, again, kind of compare them to a gallery program, because you can, as I was saying before, you can do any kind of combination of programs or strategies, or you can incorporate, art making and art looking, and there are certainly different costs, et cetera, that go along with each of those models or a combination of those models. So what are the goals, for instance, of an art making experience, or what do we see as the goals of our art making program here at the museum? Is it to, they certainly, I think, kind of changed from that pilot program, that initial pilot program session, to the rest of the programs that we've been offering ever since. So instead of having people understand, for instance, this idea of a abstract interpretation of still life versus a representational interpretation of still life, to instead really experience or explore charcoal and other drawing materials, that would have been the new focus, the new goal. The participants that you include, touched on that earlier. The cost and budget, again, a gallery program or a discussion program can be done kind of on the cheap if you don't pay your educators as we do, or if you are providing experiences that are taking place in where you don't need security or something like that, the costs are much lower. Whereas with this program, just because of the sheer supply cost, the cost will be much higher. The spaces and time, our programs are offered in our studio spaces, which can actually be very tricky to get a hold on, because there are a number of other education staff here at the museum who are using them all of the time, and also the kind of time that you have to allot for setup and cleanup can really extend the program time as well. So again, there it takes a bit more than perhaps MoMA at MoMA does. The full-time and part-time staff who are coordinating or assisting or directing the program, and then also the staff that are required to teach or lead the program. For MoMA at MoMA, for instance, in the galleries, we have an individual leading a tour and then a volunteer who is with them. And we have 6 groups, so we have 6 times that. But here for 2 groups, we have about 3 staff involved. So, so there's that to consider. The training necessary and the sustainability of the program are 2 other things to think about as well. And I just want to bring up again the resources that Amir showed a couple of weeks ago. We have both a publication that you all will be getting at the end of this, and then also a website where we have example lessons. And each of the example lessons, you can see that the modules pages is highlighted there in the screenshot, incorporate an art making project that is connected with the theme. So you can, of course, use it as part of a kind of gallery discussion, and you can do both, or you can just isolate them. Again, you can really mix and match as you see fit. And so these are just some examples that you can use, and hopefully they'll be helpful. And in my attempt to talk as slowly as possible, I've, of course, run through all of the slides in 30 minutes. So we have plenty of time for questions. So I guess, Kara, if you want to chime in. I think I touched on a lot of ones. We received some before the program today, but I think I've touched on a lot of them. So I don't know if, Kara, you'd like to just have people ask them as they're going. I'm also going to put the phone back on speakerphone so that Amir can chime in.
Hi. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Laurel. That was great. And I guess I just wanted to ask you first, are there questions from the pre-sent-in questions that I sent that you want to address before we open it up to the floor?
Sure. I mean, there were some questions on here that are very kind of specific to our program and the history of it, and then also with regards to like licensing or the people who lead the programs, what kinds of training, et cetera, they should go through or we think would be helpful for them. So just to touch on the very easy question about our program first, I guess, one participant asked if this program collaborated with the Lincoln Center for the Arts Aesthetic Education, and no, we have not, and I'm actually not sure who that is, but I mean, I know Lincoln Center, but that's the short answer to that. And then just to give you a sense too of the individuals who lead the art making program, they're the exact same individuals who lead the art discussion program. We have a pool of community and access educators, and there are about 14 individuals who teach not only this program or programs for this audience, but also programs for individuals with a range of abilities with disabilities, and also coming from a range of kind of community organizations. And so I think we've kind of determined that pretty much all of those individuals are practicing artists themselves, sort of teaching artists, and so they're the ones who lead this program. And they've been trained or kind of educated on the nature of Alzheimer's disease, and the kind of the effect of Alzheimer's disease on cognition and behavior and whatnot. They've also worked with the range of audiences in general, so they're just sort of sensitive to an individual's needs and are very receptive to kind of the way that individuals are participating, are very good at adjusting kind of as per those needs. And so that's the only kind of training that we would recommend, I would say. I don't know if you have anything to add, Amir. No. Does that answer your question for those who are kind of interested in training or accreditation or licensing or past professional experience?
I would go ahead.
Okay. I was trained, I'm a teaching artist, and I was trained through the Creative Center to be a hospital artist in residence, which was Robin Glazer's great program. Actually, I went to MoMA and was part of the Meet Me, trained that way. The reason I wanted to listen to this webinar was I'm working in Alzheimer's facilities now, and I need to widen and see what materials are available.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I could never, to me, printing, I think of linoleum or block, and I could never give these, mostly women in my group, they don't have the physical strength to make prints. So this foam, what was that you called? The foam?
Balsa foam.
Yeah, like how would I find it? Like, that's what I'm interested in working with Alzheimer's. They don't want to have materials that you would use with children.
Right.
They want, like, adult materials, but materials that they can use. And with this balsa foam, it would be great. So where do you buy it?
We got it at dickblick.com. We get most of our supplies from Dick Blick.
Okay, now the book, are we getting that resource book? Does that book have actual projects that have been successful in your art making program with Alzheimer's?
It does. It does have art making projects.
With that wide variety of materials. Materials, you're right, is the key with working with Alzheimer's.
It doesn't really so what's in the book, actually, the book was being written before we did the pilot art program. So what we do have is in the module section, and we have some activities in relation to a theme, but then again, it goes to the theme. And then in the sections where there's suggestions for organizations, families, and museums, there's a whole section about how to go about doing art-making programs. But it seems to me like what you're asking, very specific materials and how they were used in the and where it was,
because I'm good.
That's not in the book, because obviously it's a process that we've discovered. And I think the way to think about it, of course, some materials are more or less helpful. Like Laurel was saying, we're not going to extremely exotic places. I mean, we're just looking through catalogs, looking to look at exactly the parameters you touched on, not infantilizing, not condescending, but at the same time handleable and manipulable. things that. So we just go through Dick Blick. We go through some resources.
I have it. I've been to UNESCO, I think it's called, SNS. I've gone through catalogs, and I have a curriculum. But
exactly. And I mean, so the thing is it's a never-ending process, as you well know. So some things work better than other things. I mean,
I like to learn from other people's errors, though.
Some settings, some work better with people at some stages. With the number of people in a group may affect it. The number of there's so many parameters. So I would say that it's just a constant process of trying it out and seeing what happens.
Okay. I have one other question. How do you address the gamut of cognitive abilities in a group? Say I have 10 people in my group. Like I was very drawn to the still life that you showed in the very beginning of how he drew people drawing.
Yeah.
So here you have a group of 10 people, and 5 of them are drawing, and the 4 they. How do I engage them in that way without telling them they have what to do?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the most kind of delicate parts of this type of programming. And what we try and do is leave projects kind of open, but for those who like more directed experiences, provide that as well. And then we also try to create projects that can be done both independently and collaboratively in case there's a need for that, because I think we also experienced with the pilot program we had everyone working independently off the bat, and we found that sometimes we would see a situation where there was a caregiver who was so immersed in their project, and then the person that they had come with needed a bit more encouragement, and then because they were doing their own project, weren't there to encourage them. So if they work collaboratively, there's kind of an opportunity for them both to be involved in the decision-making and the creation there.
So when you say collaborative, you don't mean like 2 patients with dementia. You mean a caregiver and a patient.
Yeah, because that's the logistics of our program that have come with there.
And that's what I've seen too. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is Kara. I'm just going to jump in. We actually had somebody submit some questions through the online form, which anyone is actually welcome to do. There is a little question section in the dashboard that anyone can use. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask these questions. So one of the questions is, how much does it cost to run one of your sessions?
Okay. So I'm just doing math in my head. For one program for one group for 4 weeks would be, I think, it would be about $800 to pay the educator, and then I would say a few $100s for the supplies.
This is for 4 weeks. So what Laurel is saying is 4 weeks, one group. But that's because, at MoMA we're paying the teaching artists $100, $110 an hour. So, if somebody else is, it depends on where you are, what the rate is, who's teaching, et cetera, obviously. But it's basically the cost of the educator and the cost of the material if the space is there.
Yeah.
And there was a second question as well, which is, how are caregivers involved in focus groups and also in the art-making sessions?
So our program is for both participants, so to speak, both individuals with dementia and their caregivers equally. So they're involved in that. They're creating works of their own, and they're there. Everyone is just participating together. And then the focus groups, it was the same thing. I mean, it's I guess we don't really distinguish or differentiate between participants in that way. So for the focus groups, we asked questions to everyone so they reflected on their own experience. We didn't, for the focus groups for this program, we didn't actually ask the caregivers to reflect on the experience of the person that they were coming with.
So another question here is, did you encounter any inhibition from participants regarding expressing their creativity or showing the work at the end of course exhibition, and what are some strategies for overcoming this?
I don't recall anyone being apprehensive about showing their work. we at the end of each session we just told everyone that we were going to keep their work and show at the end, and no one ever seemed to have a problem with that. And then I think the delight of seeing your work presented in a very elegant way on a wall at the Museum of Modern Art seemed to, bring some joy. And then to overcome initial kind of fear of creating work or tapping into their artistic side, I think that the images that are shown and talked about at the beginning are very helpful in that, because again they provide example. I think they take off some of the pressure of creating something from nothing. I mean, even speaking personally, sometimes you get supplies and it's like you don't even know where to begin. And so I think that the images, having that there, can at least provide some inspiration and work from. Mm-hmm. We also, I'm thinking, in some projects, try to provide a kind of starting off point. So I just had a meeting yesterday where we were planning the curriculum for this year's program, and we were going to work with wire, and we decided to provide an armature to start from, where the wire would already be attached, and then it's almost a matter of drawing in space with the wire, but you already have it there and ready to go, and then you could just begin to play with it. Or for example, another project that we've done in the past was with color aid paper. I don't know if you guys are familiar with color aid paper, but it comes in what seems like a billion different colors, and we had people fold and tear and kind of paste it all together to create these collages. And to start that out, we just laid paper all on the tables of all sorts of different colors, and people could just kind of start grabbing and working with them. So I think sometimes it depends on, this depends on the material that you're using, but just kind of providing the materials in a way that just allow for people to experiment without the kind of pressure of creating a finished product is another strategy that you can use to overcome some of that initial inhibition, if it's there.
So someone else had a question about the length of the sessions, and you said they were 2 hours each, and that seems like a long time for people to stay focused. So did you have to keep changing things up during the session to keep people's interest?
We haven't. The first pilot program, the program was each session was an hour and a half, and no one seemed to finish in time. So we just extended it to 2 hours so that no one felt like they needed to scoot out of there. But if you finish early, then you also have time to walk around and kind of chat with other people and reflect on their work and share in that experience together. So I don't know if you guys remember any experience of anyone kind of running out of, or finding, they had time at the end. No.
I mean, the 2 hours also includes people coming, sitting down. It's just a whole 2 hour block, 2 hour, 15-minute block. And, people are free to, if they need a break, they can take a break in the middle, just making sure all the very extremely mundane logistical considerations, the classroom is close to the restroom, if people, again, so if it's difficult to focus in a different setting, then maybe it needs to be slightly shorter. But again, it's a question of the pressure. You don't want the opposite, which is the pressure of having to finish. But, if, let's say everybody's in a care organization and it takes 2 minutes for everybody to go to their rooms or for them to come down, then maybe it's worthwhile to just have that be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It's very flexible. It doesn't have to be, it really depends on so many factors.
And some projects, for printmaking, for instance, I think I recall people making multiple prints because there's time for that in 2 hours. So you can certainly adjust, and it might depend on the project and how long it takes.
Great. So another question was, did you see any difference between working in 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions? And was one of them more difficult or easier for participants?
No, I don't really recall any difference between the projects that were 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. I would say that they're all pretty similar, or it seemed like response was pretty similar from project to project. Sorry, I feel like that's not a very helpful answer. But
one of the other things that happened, and that was evident in some of the responses is that over time people also, there's a whole dynamic that goes beyond just the art. Like people start to get to know each other, they like each other, they want to spend that social time together. It's almost like, I don't want to say going to school, but having a group experience, maybe a college course or whatever, where, then people start helping each other out, or give, sort of pointers, or, the overall sense of engaging with these material and doing things is similar, and people have positive vibes. It doesn't mean that it's as quote-unquote successful in the creation of it. Maybe a three-dimensional project is more complex or complicated rather than, let's say, a different one. But overall, I think people really enjoy them. They're not thinking, oh, my God, this is a three-dimensional, I'm out of here. It's, it may be a little more challenging. Maybe somebody needs to help out more. Maybe the educators are more involved in collaborating with each person, whereas with another project, they're not. I think it's really important to take these variables into consideration, where the facilitator and the educator and the volunteers, maybe in one session they're kind of laid back because everybody's very involved. In another one, it's very intense for them because people need more help. It doesn't mean it's better or worse, but I think the environment is always such that people know they're going to go through this process. It'll bring a lot, and the camaraderie and the help and having engaged in this creative endeavor in and of itself is very useful.
And I would also add that I think, something that Amir always talks about, I think talked about the last time, was that these notions that we have as educators or people who are in an instructive role are slightly different than what participants might be thinking. So, the example that Amir talks about is abstract versus representational, and that these are notions that we have kind of accepted but aren't necessarily something that everyone is thinking about, or they're not necessarily classifying their creation or the works that they're looking at in that way. And I would kind of say the same for 3D and 2D. Obviously there's like a kind of right or wrong answer for it, but for instance, we worked with clay to make these rounded clay heads that would be sculpture in the round, so to speak. And then there were some people who made like a slab face, and that's more of a two-dimensional interpretation, and either way is absolutely fine. And so I wouldn't, I think, again, like, it's just the material, and that's the potential that exists within clay, and that's the great thing about the experience, that you can do either way, and it's the kind of better or more wide interpretation of that material.
So how did people respond to the clay in terms of, like, it's the mess of it and the it's...
Yeah.
How did they go with that? Did you observe the project where?
Yeah.
How was that?
In terms of the mess, no one really seemed to mind. That it was actually something that in one of the previous evaluations we had asked what types of materials people were interested in working with, and a lot of people said clay, so we decided to do it. And no one seemed to really mind getting their hands messy, and I would say some people really embraced that opportunity.
What kind of clay did you use?
Mexican clay.
Mexican clay?
Yeah, it's air drying as opposed to kiln drying, firing clay. So that's why we use it for kind of convenience.
Okay. And how important is it to finish a project in one session? Say you have once a week. You have the same group.
Yeah.
Does something get lost in not finishing it and finishing it in two sessions, or should I strive to finish it every week to have a project beginning and end?
I would say that we think, because we know we're working on different mediums each time, that it's kind of within that session you do what you can. But it's also like, it's an interesting question because it brings up this idea of like, what is the goal of that individual project? So for instance, if you're like having them do some kind of, if there's like paint, or you're working, for instance, I showed the image of us working with oil-based and water-based paint. Like, is that at the end, is it even done? Like, you could revisit it next week and build on it. Like there's potential to do it either way. And, is it the idea of creating an image in one experience, or is it the idea of trying to create something that you can continually revisit and continue to develop, either way I think is kind of fine. But again, because we have isolated mediums per session, then we don't revisit them later.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So another question was, if caregivers sometimes might dominate the collaborative process, so do you have any pre-briefing that you give to caregivers about how they can help facilitate?
We don't, and I've actually never really experienced a caregiver being, too hands-on, so to speak, with the person they're coming with. I would say, in general, for instance, if we're looking at the clay again, where we had people work collaboratively, if they wanted to, Amir was talking again about the camaraderie, and that's exactly what it is. It's a really nice community and a really kind of supportive community that you're creating and that will develop. And I always found that caregivers were just kind of encouraging and supportive if they were in that role as encourager, so to speak. So I've never really had
one
an
thing
issue.
that we always say at the beginning of all the programs, whether it's in the galleries or the classroom or the studio or whatever, is that this is a program for everyone, that everyone should participate, that everybody should make sure that everybody else has space to be able to participate on their own. So it's not an official pre-briefing, bringing all the caregivers to the side, etc. But there's this notion that there's a balance between working on your own things, making sure everybody participates, and being aware that some people obviously may need more time, or et cetera, which the caregivers, for the most part, are very aware of. Obviously, it's a self-selecting group that's coming to us. So just mentioning those things is helpful, but not in a formal way.
Yeah, and I think, and also when you're kind of setting a tone that way, emphasizing that you don't need to, create the most amazing bust anybody has ever seen, where people feel like there's pressure to create an end product like that. Then I think that frees everyone else up from a kind of forced experience.
So that's kind of related to the last question that I have here, which is somebody is an artist who works in programs where there's a requirement to produce an end product, and they are wondering how you feel about that requirement versus just having people do individual projects that they can keep. And do you see any downside to having that requirement to make an end product?
I think it can go both ways. I think that as was indicated by the focus group responses, having a product can be really nice because it allows for extended conversation beyond the particular experience. And I think you can frame the experience from the beginning, saying that it doesn't have to be, perfect, or kind of taking away this notion of perfection in the end product, so that people can enjoy the process as well. I'm kind of curious, I don't know if the person is on the line, but what the setting is exactly that requires an end product. Or why it's required in the first place, and if there's any kind of wiggle room within it.
Yes, this is Gail Scuderi. I'm the artist. I've just worked in different nursing home settings. Work for Apple Farm, which is an art center. I'm working in the healthcare sector. And they always require me I work in clay, so they want me to make these mosaic murals with the clients there. And
I see.
Sometimes they have a hard time, wrapping their heads around, because I don't have an image for them. They don't really know what they're doing. I guess at the end, when it all comes together, it starts to make sense, but I feel like from week to week, sometimes they're not connecting to what we're doing.
I think so. One of the things that I think, first of all, if you don't have images, it might be, you can print out or get prints of, I don't know if that's what you mean or not, from any museum website or whatever, to bring in so that they have ideas of images to look at, because it's always great to be able to look at things. But the other thing I was going to say is that this end product situation, especially with this audience, I believe actually with anybody, you don't want to put too much pressure on people, even though I don't necessarily not believe in end products, as I'm sure we all don't, meaning we all kind of believe in end products. But I think in this particular case, you would know that you need an end product, but simultaneously, I don't think you have to or you can even put the pressure on these particular participants that you need them to produce an end product. So you have to make sure that based on the curriculum, the project, etc., you take them through a process where there will be an end product without them feeling the pressure that there needs to be an end product. So it's more on you even than usual.
Right.
Because I think it's just putting pressure on folks with dementia is just going to exacerbate the situation, and the impatience and it's just going to be counterproductive, basically. You need the end product.
And I think that there are some mediums that might lend themselves to that more than others. So, again, the example of paint, water-based, and oil-based.
But she needs to do mosaics, very specific things.
Yeah.
That's it's tricky because since you have to do a very specific thing for, you're kind of the limits that are imposed on you are kind of difficult too. So your particular challenge is now, how do I, knowing the actual end product, not just an end product, and how it all comes together, what processes do I need to take people through so that this is what we get?
Right. Okay.
Which is a whole, maybe a different series of questions that are similar to these, but slightly adapted.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So we only have 1 minute till 3. So I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to close out. But, if anyone has any extra questions that they think of afterwards, definitely feel free to email the Society office, and we can pass anything on to Laurel and Amir, and hopefully they will be kind enough to provide some extra answers after the webinar.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you guys are probably in the membership directory as well, in case anyone is a member and wants to search the membership directory to get in touch. So, so thank you so much to Laurel and Amir for running these webinars and answering everybody's questions. It's been really informative. And thank you to everyone on the phone for participating as well. Just a few closing notes. We are going to be sending out an evaluation to everyone who participated, so please fill it out for us. We want to make sure we're offering, the best webinar series that we can, and everyone's input really helps us do that. The PowerPoint from this webinar will be posted to our archive, which you can find from the webinar page on our website. And we are also going to be posting this full webinar series schedule, all the webinars that are going to be presented this spring and summer on our website. So please check that back probably at the end of this week to see if there are any other offerings you might be interested in.
Sarah, the book that MoMA puts out, is that going to be available to us?
I would have to check with Michelle. What she told me was that people who have attended the series are going to get the book, and I assume what's going to happen is that the Society is going to provide the list of people and addresses to Laurel and Amir so that they can send out the books. But that will be confirmed. But definitely, it seems like everyone is going to be getting a book. So
I would also, sorry, Kara, but just say that all of the content from the book is available on our website. So it's of course nice to have a book, but it's also available for free and immediately right there.
The art making one is on your website?
It's all there.
Well, again, that arts that I was talking about, the art making, right? There isn't an art making section per se.
Okay.
All right.
I saw the other one, the Meet Me one.
Yeah. All of that is all the content is online.
Okay. Thank you.
But there isn't an art making book.
Okay.
There is not an art making book per se. No. There's art making suggestions and activities.
Well, that's what I meant.
Sections.
Yeah.
That's online?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. So thank you again, Laurel and Amir, and thank you so much for everyone for participating. And have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.